there's winners and losers in the game of life on the terms of Western industrialized society, which says that bigger is better and more is better and faster is better and more money is better and more power is better at any cost to human life, to the earth itself, that dollars are more valuable than health or integrity or well-being. And I think that a lot of us are feeling the limitations of that and saying, no, we long for something deeper and more.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
So Alexandra, I think we'd be remiss, both of us, if we didn't have a conversation and at least honor the scenario that happened a couple of days ago, where the 1973 decision at Roe v. Wade was overturned, and 1973 was the year that I was born. So it especially to me feels like we're literally reversing my life, like we are stepping backwards in time. And what the Supreme Court, found, what it comes down to is that it's unconstitutional for a woman to choose, because it wasn't something that our framers wrote into the original Constitution. So they are now leaving it up to the states to decide.
Yeah. It was also to add Roe v. Wade, which allowed a woman to have an abortion before 24 weeks, I think it is 24 weeks, was decided under the right to privacy. That right to privacy also decided the right to have an interracial marriage. The right that it basically said the government couldn't interfere into whom you marry, and that was then brought in to allow gays to marry not too long ago. It also was the reason that women are allowed to use contraception, and there are many more laws that have been made underneath this right to privacy thought, and the fear not only about abortion itself and what's going to happen, is that those rights could get eroded too, especially where women are concerned, and gays also. Yeah.
I know it's kind of wild to think about going back over a couple hundred years ago, because obviously back then we didn't have a right to love who we wanted to. Back then we also didn't have the right to travel, which seems ridiculous, but it's true. So to me,
women, you mean women?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was just no written right for humans to be able to travel in the Constitution, right? Like there's all these things. It's like that it wasn't written down that we had a right to do.
Because Samuel Alito said it's not in the Constitution. That was one of his arguments for why Roe v. Wade is not constitutional, because abortion doesn't appear in there.
Right.
Air travel doesn't appear in the Constitution either. But anyway.
Right. And so many other things. So I think that's why it felt to me like more of a personal decision of 5 justices, not a decision steeped in legality, because that doesn't stand up for me because it wasn't in the Constitution, because there are literally hundreds of things, right, that we do and it's okay to do that was not originally in our original Constitution. But Alexandra, you found an interesting piece on different states' thoughts on the issue that's actually from 2019.
Yeah, and I think I was looking up because I was interested. I wanted to see the numbers of abortions in the United States, and I was looking at 2019 because that was before the pandemic. I thought that was probably a more realistic number. The pandemic might have changed that number. Um, there are 900,000 abortions each year, according to the Guttmacher Institute in the United States, and if we outlaw them they expect about half the states to outlaw abortion under this new ruling, which means that there will be hundreds of thousands of unwanted children in the United States being born every year, which is really scary because it begs the question, who's going to take care of them? Because a lot of women have abortion, and I know because I had several abortions. We don't take it lightly. There's a very good reason we're having them, and poverty is one of them. And anyway, in the stats that I found, 29 states were actually in a survey. 29 states were hostile to abortion. 14 were supportive, and the rest were sort of in between. They wanted abortion but with limitations. And I probably fall in the actually in between, abortion with limitations. I don't believe that after a certain amount of time that a woman is pregnant, unless it's a danger to her, that she should be able to abort if like after 6 months, probably would be mine. But so that would be me. But the scary thing is how many states are hostile to abortion. It's over half.
Mm-hmm.
So
your stories were not, you did not decide to have an abortion because of poverty. What were your decisions based on?
I think I was afraid that I would lose. I was 18, my first abortion, and I was in a committed relationship. I was afraid that I would lose my life. I knew that my boyfriend wouldn't lose his life at all. He would continue his career. He could even leave and abandon the baby, and nobody would feel, they would just figure we broke up, and he wouldn't have to have anything to do with it. And who knows, he might not even have to pay child support, because it's hard to get a man to pay child support. You have to go through all these legal channels if he decides not to. So I knew that it would change my life so hugely. And I wasn't ready for that at 18 to even take care of another person, much less myself. I was in the throes of severe eating disorder. But even with that, I think I wouldn't have been a good mother. Now, the question would be then, why not bring the baby to term and give it up for adoption? Mm-hmm. And I feel that's a very good alternative. I think I chose not to do that because I didn't want to bring a baby to term. But that is an option. I think that I was definitely thinking of myself then, but I also feel like, given the numbers of 900,000 abortions a year, to have everybody, already we have so many kids in foster care who want to be adopted. Yeah. For us to suddenly say, oh, well, you should just carry it to term and someone will adopt it, is not true. That is not true.
No guarantee.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had abortion when I was 16, and I was using birth control. I was terrified, like you were sharing. It was almost like I was in some kind of alternate reality. Like I couldn't even connect with what was actually happening. It took a while. It took many weeks, probably 4 or 5 weeks, for me to even really come to terms with that I was even pregnant and telling, I just wasn't having my period, and I didn't think, I was like, oh, it wasn't possible. We used a condom, like there, and I was in a committed relationship, and he was a little bit older and actually wanted to have a kid. And I was just, it was, I can only describe it as like an alternate reality. I couldn't even process that was even a remote possibility at all. And I mean, I didn't want kids, and I still don't, and didn't, and haven't had them. And I was so riddled with terror because I didn't want a child. And I thought, who brings a child into the world when they don't want them? Who wants to be an unwanted child? I mean, I was a child and I felt wanted by my parents, and I could not imagine being in the hands of parents who did not want me. And that was kind of the thing for me, was I can't bring an unwanted child into on this planet. It was so terrifying. And I feel grateful that I was able to make my own choice about my own body and my own decision.
I can hear the emotion, and it is emotional. I hear a lot about people who say that abortion should be illegal, saying that it's, very traumatic for the women, and they're acting like they're protecting the women from the experience. But we're just feeling complicated feelings. It doesn't mean that we're going to break. And so I know that the decision for me to have an abortion was the right one. And I believe that it was also the morally right decision for me and for the world and for the baby who didn't suffer. I went to Planned Parenthood, by the way. And interestingly, my boyfriend was also older, and he said he wanted to keep the baby. And I remember feeling really angry because it was easy and gallant for him to say, I want to keep the baby. But like I said, his life wasn't really going to dramatically change. So he could say that with such ease. Whereas for us to say yes to a pregnancy. So, yeah.
It's shuddering to me that a woman's right to choose keeps coming up for debate. It's almost like it's kind of being used as this back and forth between the left and the right, and for political gain, because there's a lot of things that we have made laws about that we're not questioning anymore. Like, there's still racism in the United States. The United States is probably the most racist country on planet Earth. But nobody's questioning Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated schools, thank God. But we're not going back to question that. Why do we keep continuously questioning a woman's right to choose what happens with her own body? It's disturbing.
I have empathy for the people who sincerely believe that it is murder.
Yeah.
You and I both value life very much. We're vegan. We value life for all species and creatures. So I respect people who believe it's murder. I don't believe it's murder. If it's before a certain point, and I believe that the life of the mother would take precedent if there was a choice and the baby had to be aborted after 6 months or so. But I think it's because I do believe a lot of people do believe very viscerally that it's murder. And if they do believe that, then they should be out in the streets protesting. And I'm all for that. Yeah. So I know some people say, well, they should let us do it then. And I say, well, if you think it's murder, I guess you and we think it's murder for, for people to eat meat, but we're not telling them that they can't.
Exactly. Yeah. I think something that comes up for me after this conversation with you, during this conversation with you, because we've both been through it, is I guess I don't feel like if you haven't walked in the shoe, it's necessarily okay to be pointing the fingers, especially men.
Yeah.
Who have that, right? They're very heartfelt, very well thought out, very specific, hard decisions that women have to make. None of them are ever made flippantly or Yeah. So I think that's what's coming up for me, right? Is it's not like you were saying with the, we're not making a law so other people can't eat our friends.
Right.
We're just choosing not to. And I think that at the end of the day is really, for me, we can believe whatever we want, but it just doesn't seem like something that the government should control. We should just have a choice. And then other people that believe it's murder obviously have that choice to not abort. But I think that's what gets to me, is it just doesn't seem like something that a government should have control over.
Who's going to take care of these 500,000 unwanted babies that are being born in the United States each year? Mm-hmm. A lot of those people who feel like we shouldn't have abortions are also not willing to fund daycare and parental leave for mothers, or all sorts of things. So
right.
Anyway, I know this is a heavy topic, Dotsie. Thank you for bringing it up. And
thank you.
We have somebody also who's very thoughtful, but he's a man, but I know that he's a special man in that he has a lot of empathy for life and his own beautiful children. And we'll be getting into that too.
Yeah, it's a fantastic interview. So yeah, thank you too for being so open and raw and sharing your truth. Our guest today, Ocean Robbins, has been a change maker from a very young age. His journey began when he was born in a one-room log cabin miles away from other people in the middle of the forest in British Columbia, Canada. His family grew most of the food they consumed and lived on less than $500 a year. He eventually moved to California, where he was schooled at home and started his very first business called Ocean's Bakery at just 11 years old. His creativity didn't stop there when at age 16, he founded Youth for Environmental Sanity, known by its acronym YES. Fast forward to today, and Ocean is co-founder and CEO of the 750,000 member Food Revolution Network. He is also the author of the best-selling book, 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World. And he is executive producer of the documentary, The Need to Grow, which y'all have not seen that. You must. Ocean has hosted more than 2 million people in online summits, spoken in person to more than 200,000 people, and facilitated leadership development events for leaders from 65 nations. And today he's here to speak to us. So welcome to the show, Ocean.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be with both of you and everybody who's watching us right now.
We're so happy to have you on. You're really such an extraordinary person. You've done so much in your young life. You radiate this kind of positivity so that a lot of people might think that you've been untouched by hardship. But I'd like to read something that you wrote, which I thought was very wise. You say, I used to pray to God to have things go the way I wanted them to go. And sometimes I still do. But increasingly, I find myself praying for the strength, the wisdom, and the patience to make the best of however things unfold around me. And one of your favorite questions to ask people is, what has been a defining struggle or challenge in your life's journey, and how has your response to it helped you grow in wisdom, faith, or compassion? And Ocean, we'd like to ask you that question.
Wow, starting with the shallow stuff, huh?
She's going deep.
If you're talking to Ocean, you might as well go deep.
Yep.
That's right. We know you can go there because you've shared a lot about your life.
You know, I think that all of us hunger for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose and conversation about things that really matter. You know, we live in a culture that often glorifies the shallow, that glorifies conspicuous consumption, in which image is everything, in which self-worth and net worth are seen as the same thing. But ultimately, human happiness, human fulfillment, human meaning is so much deeper than anything you can buy or sell, than what kind of a lip gloss you wear, or that anyone else thinks of you. It comes from the inside out. And so for me, in my own life journey, I think being a dad has undoubtedly been my greatest challenge and greatest shaper of who I am today. My dad used to say when I was little and growing up that he was proud of me for all my accomplishments because I was pretty precocious, but he would love me just as much if I was autistic. And little did I know that he was kind of presaging something, because I became a dad in 2001. My wife and I had twins, and they were born prematurely and on the autism spectrum. And so, We've been working with navigating awesomely autistic youngsters for the last 21 years now, and really learning, do I love them just as much as they are? They're not on a fast track to graduate Harvard with honors. They're not on the fast track to be at the top of their class or even in the middle of their class. They didn't talk till they were 5. They didn't walk till late. They were delayed with every developmental milestone there is. And they've always struggled with things that a lot of us take for granted. And yet they are unconditionally loved. I cherish them. I adore them with all my heart. And I'm proud of them, not because of their big accomplishments in the world, although they do have some big accomplishments that are amazing, but because they are, because every single being deserves unconditional love. And here's the thing, my kids have often behaved in ways that I didn't like. I suppose every parent can probably relate to that. Maybe it's a little more dramatic with autism, some of the things you have to learn to tolerate and accept. Martin Luther King said once, you have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt. When we judge people, when we pathologize them, we lose moral standing in the relationship. And I think the same is true as a parent. If I don't see the brilliance and the heart and the integrity underlying whatever actions my kids may be taking, if I don't see the core intent and learn to understand the world through their eyes, then I have lost moral standing as their parent. So the concept of truly understanding why someone does what they do, and then getting aligned with their core intent, and then maybe helping them find a more constructive or resourceful way to express that, is an essential part of parenting for me. Mm-hmm. And one quick story that was captures so much for me. Our kids didn't make eye contact in their first 10 years, at least with me. I didn't have the experience of looking into their eyes and just seeing each other. And this is common for parents of autistic kids. When they were 10, we got into a program called Sunrise, SONRISE, which focuses on a relationship-based approach to autism. So instead of trying to drag them out of their world into ours, we join them in their world, build connection with them. And then out of that, they show us the door in, and then we can show them the door out. So one day, my kid, River, is chewing on a Barbie's foot. And instead of yanking it out of his mouth, worrying that this plastic is made in China and wondering what toxins are leaching into his body, or wondering how my kid's ever going to have a dating life if he chews on Barbie feet all day long, I join him. So I sit across the room from him and I pick up another Barbie and I start chewing on her foot. And I'm not expecting this to lead anywhere. I'm just trying to join him in his experience, see if I can get some understanding of the texture of a Barbie foot in the mouth and what that's like. Suddenly he looks at me and this huge smile comes over his face. And he's looking straight in my eyes with this big grin. And I could almost hear him thinking, oh my God, there is intelligent life on this planet. And so then River's staring at me and we're beaming in each other's eyes, chewing on Barbie feet for what felt like an eternity. And then he gestures like this. His Barbie has 2 feet. He's inviting me to come chew on the other foot of his Barbie. So now we're 3 inches apart. And we're beaming in each other's eyes. We've got these huge grins going on while we got Barbie feet in our mouths. And there's a tear rolling down my face. Yeah. And I'm experiencing real connection with my son for the first time in his 10 years of life. Mm. And that's he doesn't chew on Barbie feet anymore, but things like that have been repeated so many times where I join him and suddenly we're in contact. And now he makes eye contact more than I do. I mean, I just look at him suddenly, oh my God, he's been looking at me this whole time, staring in my eyes. And whenever the topic of conversation is, sometimes it's repetitive because that can happen with autism. Sometimes it's not the topics that I find interesting. His reading of social cues is mixed, but he has a heart of gold. He loves to delight people. He loves to make people smile and laugh, and he loves to make eye contact. If I had continued to try to drag him into my world, we never would have had that connection. So to me, this plays out in everything I do. If I'm trying to promote healthy eating, for example, if I'm pathologizing people who don't eat up to my standards, how much influence am I going to have, right? How effectively will I help them make changes in their lives? But if I respect, I know you're eating the best you can, the best you know how for where you're at. Some of us are addicted to unhealthy food. Some of us only have so much money or time. We have the habits we've got. We were raised the way we were raised. We like the things we like. And if I can empathize with people, then I can also help them make the food choices that are in integrity with their values, with their conscience, with their life goals, then I'm truly in service to them. But you can't get there if you don't understand people and respect people for who they are.
Yeah, what a beautiful life lesson from them. I suddenly now would like to have the entire podcast be about them. It sounds like a magical journey. I'm sure one of the roughest journeys as well, but I think that's every person that's had a human being. It can be filled with lots of ups and downs. But will you tell us about them now? They're 21, and obviously they're individuals. So what do each of them care about? What do they love? What's their favorite thing to do? What do you learn from them? What did you learn from them yesterday?
Our twins love music.
Mm.
They love live music. They love recorded music. They're listening to it all day long, and they like every genre, which has been a stretch for me. I'll be honest. Like I had my likes and dislikes, and now there's music in our home, 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And they love Alexa, and they'll listen to every which thing. And, so we're hearing pop, and we're hearing country, and we're hearing jazz, and we're hearing classical, and we're hearing death metal, and we're hearing Christian, and we're hearing rock, and we're hearing avant-garde, and we're hearing folk, and we're hearing experimental, and we're hearing weird songs and sound effects. Like they like to listen to dogs barking, and they'll listen to the entire album of dogs barking, I mean, it's just, but to them, it's just life is this playground, and music is this playground. And I love their open-minded creativity and their passion. That you can find joy in just about anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that humanity is a little bit like this. Like all of this music was created by people because somebody out there thought it was worth investing time and energy in making these sounds, right? And so the ability to recognize all of the diversity of the human race, all of the creative ways people express, and to get out of the judging mind that's like, I'm this kind of person, and I like this kind of music, and I like this kind of person. It's like, no, what about having a bigger palette of colors to choose from, and experiencing more and loving life more? And so to me, my kids are teaching me about that in the most profound way.
Can you give us an understanding of autism for those who are confused? We hear that term a lot, but what does it mean?
Well, the way I look at it, autistic people actually have often hyperintelligence and hyperactive brains, and they don't filter in the way that neurotypical people do. So they can get on sensory overload really quickly. If you're looking at something with your eyes, you're actually focused on a very narrow spot, and you can't read if you have a really wide panorama vision. You can soften your eyes and actually take in more of what's in the periphery. But if you do that, you won't be able to read well. So in their case, it's not quite an apt metaphor, but the point is that your brain doesn't filter. So if they're in a room and there's 30 people talking, they might be listening to the conversation you and I are having with them, but suddenly you realize they were also hearing the conversation that was going on over there. Like they're absorbing it all sensorially, and they're absorbing smells, they're absorbing sounds, they're absorbing sights, they're absorbing sensations, even energy without the kind of filter. So they're not able to focus or to tune out, which means they're hyperstimulated. So they'll often go into repetitive patterns or behaviors, asking the same question over and over, telling the same joke over and over, following the same track, which can be a superpower for some autistic people when they become almost savant-like. Some people become mathematical geniuses, for example, because that's the thing they focus on. Our kids have various things right now. It's music. At times they learned every country in the world and every capital, and what type of monetary system they have at the age of 3 or 4 before they could talk, so they just like hone in on these things, and they could capture that. I mean, I remember once my wife was like, we had a map of the world up, and she's like, where's Djibouti? She asks me, like someone had mentioned it. And our son River, who can't talk, who's 3 years old, runs over to the map and he points out Djibouti on the map, right? And he's right. And it's like, how did this kid know that? So because that's where his brain was, but he's not focusing on the thing we want him to talk about, which is like learning how to talk, So there's they have their own rhythm and their own pacing and their own purposes. But at its core, it's a sensory overload issue that leads to hyperfocus, or what looks to some people like lack of focus, because they're not focusing on the things that other people want them to focus on in many cases. And that can present a lot of challenges, or sometimes it can present really unique gifts. And then a lot of times it shows up as lack of emotional connectivity, social isolation, because they don't know how to interact with the world on its terms, and the world won't interact with them on their terms. And so there's this disconnect, and so in our experience, then it's been part of the practice to connect with them on their terms, help create an environment where they can still be themselves, but they don't have to be alone. And so we try as much as possible to surround them with people who get them and are interested in them. And then from there, they build real connections, and, they start to make friends. And, our kids give me hugs like every day. There's not a lot of 21-year-olds that'll still walk over and just put their arm around their dad and just stand there while we're chatting, like it's super sweet because they've learned to make human connection in a positive way. Most autistic people sadly haven't had that opportunity. In a culture that values certain forms of intelligence over others, some autistic people excel, others, many of them don't. If an Aborigine was to design an IQ test, all of Western civilization would probably flunk. We have our ways of measuring success and progress. And, I think it was Krishnamurti who said it's no measure of mental health to be well adjusted to an insane world. And yet we have so many things that we take as a given in our world, and we take them as normal, and then we measure, and there's winners and losers in the game of life on the terms of Western industrialized society, which says that bigger is better, and more is better, and faster is better, and more money is better, and more power is better at any cost to human life, to the earth itself, that dollars are more valuable than health or integrity or well-being. And I think that a lot of us are feeling the limitations of that and saying, no, we long for something deeper and more. And a lot of autistic people just can't play that game, So, but they can play their own game. And our kids are a cause for me to slow down, to drop in, to connect, to remember that smiles and love and eye contact are more important sometimes than stimulating intellectual conversation. And in that sense, I'm a deeper human, I'm a slower human, I'm a kinder human, I'm a more humble human for sure, for being their dad. And I think that serves me in all kinds of ways as I move through the world.
It seems like such a celebration when you can find that part of them. And I think it takes a really focused, acute parent to recognize that special talent. The most gifted cyclist I ever knew in all my 15 years as a professional, I'm positive, was on the spectrum and had such an intense fear and terror of social situations that you couldn't really get her out of the hotel room. We traveled all over the world. But the second you put her on that bike, it was like she just would shine like nobody I've ever seen. And it was so beautiful to see her doing her thing. Like that was it. And that'll always be it. And now she coaches, but I love how you're sharing the journey with them. It took so much listening on your part.
Would you ever consider writing a book about parenting? Because already I'm inspired by you. And I know that a lot of parents of kids on the spectrum would be so heartened to hear what you have to say.
Certainly I could at some point,
you have a lot of other things going on, I know.
Yeah, I'm trying to change the way the world eats, which is turning out to be a project too.
Can we talk about, you talk about this when, as you're helping the world change their eating habits, gratitude. And it kind of is a bridge that we can go from your personal life to your life with the Food Revolution Network. You believe it is such a vital element to a happy life. And you even talk about the science behind it. Can you expand on that?
Well, yeah, the neuroscience of gratitude is quite fascinating. I mean, it sort of makes sense that happy people would have more gratitude, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you win the lottery, are you going to have gratitude that day? Probably, anytime good things happen to you, you'll tend to be grateful for them if you're paying attention. And if you feel the impact of that, if you fall in love, are you going to be grateful? Absolutely, But so there are a lot of studies that show a correlation between gratitude and happiness. And I always thought, well, yeah, of course, right? But what's interesting is that gratitude doesn't just come about because of good things happening. It actually goes the other way around. what you appreciate has a tendency to appreciate. Where you put your energy tends to grow. And you can see this in the most intimate level with a spouse or a family member. If they say something nice about you, like, thanks for doing the dishes, I really appreciate that. Are you more or less likely to do the dishes the next day? You're probably more likely. You know, if your good behaviors are rewarded through appreciation and gratitude, you tend to want to do them more, versus if you feel invisible, you feel like all your efforts are unappreciated and unseen, you may keep doing it because you're a good person, but at the end of the day, you feel a bit like an unappreciated plow horse, not like not like an honored, celebrated, treasured person. So I think that there's also a way that shows up in terms of our own sensorium. So when you feel gratitude for something, you become more able to receive it. You become more conscious of it. And then it becomes bigger in your consciousness and in your life. And with things like happiness or pleasure, their placebo effect is super real. I mean, you aren't just a product of the chemicals you put in your body, you're also a product of the chemicals you manufacture in your body. Mm-hmm. And gratitude actually creates chemicals in your brain that make you more receptive to good things, that make you more available to positive outcomes and to life going better. And so gratitude doesn't just make things feel better, it actually makes them get better. It actually influences your probability of positive health outcomes, positive mental health outcomes, and positive life circumstance. Statistically, people who take even 5 minutes a day to write down 3 things they're grateful for at the end of the day, and this has been studied, their marriages last longer. They exercise more, they lose weight, they feel better about themselves, they feel happier and more fulfilled and more satisfied in their lives. And that's not just because good fortune fell upon them. In fact, it is in tough times, in dark nights of the soul, that it is even more imperative to find something to cling to remember to be grateful for. And if there's breath in your lungs, if there's blood in your veins, if there's thoughts in your consciousness, if you have hopes and dreams and prayers or possibilities for your life, you've got something to be grateful for. And we always focus on the squeaky wheel, the weakest link in the chain. And that can be powerful. Sometimes the weakest link in the chain has got to be shored up if you want the chain to hold together, to use a cycling metaphor. But ultimately, we also need to have some sense of gratitude for the whole chain that is working, for the wheels that are working, and for our capacity to make something better in the world, right? So even if all you're grateful for is that tomorrow might be better than today was, that's something, like sometimes that's the best you can do. I'm grateful that I woke up this morning and I'm not dead yet, like that might be all you got. Well, you know what? That's something. Okay. I'll take. Sometimes that's the best you can do. That's okay. Build on that, keep going from there. Don't do false platitudes. Don't be grateful for wishful thinking that's unreal. I'm grateful that the love of my life adores me when they haven't said a nice thing to you for 3 years, like maybe that's not real, but be grateful for what you've actually got going on. I'm grateful that we're still fighting it out. I'm grateful that we're going into therapy. I'm grateful that I'm learning to ask for what I want. Even if I don't get it, I'm getting clearer about what I want. Like there's always things that you can find. And so taking a few minutes a day to give thanks can be incredibly powerful. And this is proven in study after study. And then there's another very simple opportunity. You could take 5 minutes at the end of the day. That's the main thing that's been studied. But you could also give thanks at a meal time. And we have this tradition of blessing the meal and going around with giving thanks at a meal. In our family, we often go around and say one thing we're grateful for around the dinner table. And it just takes a few minutes. And it's amazing how it brings a family together. And then everyone's not just on their phone or, what are we going to watch for TV while we eat or complaining about this or that, or, the things that can happen around a family dinner table. You're uniting around something positive and you're bringing people together. And that tradition, even before breaking bread, before the first bite, can really be a ritual that's bonding. And, studies show that families that eat together tend to last longer and be healthier and be happier and feel more love. And so, and a gratitude blessing can be a really singular ritual for establishing that you're eating together. Because otherwise it's like, okay, food's on the table and people come in at all different times and do all different things, but there's a moment when we're all together and we're all sitting together. And to me, that can be, not for every family, but for a lot of families, that can be sacred. That can be really beautiful. We also take it a step further in our family, and we do rosebud thorns. So well, each person can say one rose, which is one thing they're happy about that happened today, one thing blooming, one thing joyous or beautiful. A bud is something that you're looking forward to or hopeful about in the future. And a thorn is something that's sad or tender or painful in your life right now. Maybe not in that order. Sometimes we do rose, thorn, bud. So we're ending on hope. But it's amazing how, there's the old saying that among friends, joy shared is doubled and sorrow shared is halved. And it's so important for family to know what each other are going through. Like, what are you scared about? What are you hopeful about? What was hard today? What was beautiful today? And it can be simple. It can be, my rose is that, I had a beautiful peach today. My thorn is that, I've got this sore spot on my foot and I'm a little worried about it. And my bud is that I'm meeting with a friend tomorrow and I'm looking forward to seeing her. It's been a while, or whatever. It can be very simple, but it's meaningful. And you drop a little deeper. And I think this kind of connective tissue, and gratitude should be a centerpiece of it, really can bond a family. And then the last piece I'll say is appreciation towards other people. So we also have a ritual where we'll say 3 things we appreciate about each other. My partner and I do this regularly, and we just go back and forth, appreciation, back and forth 3 times. And it could be simple things. Sometimes if we're really cranky with each other, it's the best way to break up a fight, And the first thing might be thanks for not being as mean to me today as you were yesterday, or, but it's you notice and then it gets better. And by the 3rd one, you're hearts open again, and you remember who this person is and you're on the same team. So these are some of the rituals that I think can be really powerful.
I think sometimes it's hard for us to go deeper, and the examples you've given are ways that we can go deeper with each other. It kind of opens the door. And with friends, my friend Marcia once, we were at dinner with about 6 people, and she said, can everyone share what the best thing that happened to them this last week is? And automatically that just makes everyone in a better mood, and it opens the door for a deeper conversation because we know a little bit more about the other person at the table.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Ocean.
For sure.
I'm interested in learning a bit more about this self-directed learning, because it sounds like it enabled you to start a natural foods bakery called Ocean's Bakery when you were 11, and your efforts there landed you on the front page of the Santa Cruz Sentinel under the headline, "Boy, is it very rich, but he's got dough." That is just so darn cute. I had to mention that. But I'm interested how the self-directed, well, first I want to know what it is, and then how it's formed you today and the 20 years that you've directed an organization with a big budget.
Yeah, so
use it.
I founded a nonprofit when I was 16 and directed it for 20 years. And then I launched Food Revolution Network with my dad a couple of years after that in 2012. So yeah, I've been up to big things for a while. And I do think that for me, what we called homeschooling, what's sometimes called unschooling or self-directed learning was really a critical piece for my journey. It's not right for every kid. But for me, especially with the home support that I had, I'm really grateful that I was able to follow my own path. I think that curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And we equate not knowing something with weakness, but I think we need to equate it with an open door towards curiosity. If you don't know something, then you have an opportunity to learn something. And if you can learn something, like that is life in action. That is the seed sprouting that could become a tree. And so anytime you really are available to truly learn something because you're hungry to understand it, because it matters to you, you're in the game, you're present, and you're powerful in that. And so in my experience, the times when I don't know the way forward, when I'm lost and confused and feel empty, or I realize how much I don't know, like, I don't know how to do this. Like there's a vulnerability in that. There's a humility in that. And there's also an invitation in that to the forces of life or to my own creative impulse or to my own curious presence to discover something new. I might be about to learn something. And that is big. And for me, the school systems that we have today have the danger of actually training curiosity out of kids by kind of forcing them to learn the things that are on the curricula that they're supposed to learn so that the school can get its benchmarks, so that the teachers can hit their benchmarks to show, yes, we followed the curricula and we taught the kids what was on the standardized tests so that we could check it off and say that we're a good school or a good teacher, because that's our job and that's what we're paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of that, of course, is that, yeah, everybody's going to be kind of on the same page, and all the kids will learn certain basic things that we as a society have decided are important to learn. But the danger of that is that for a lot of kids who don't fit into those boxes, who aren't interested in those topics, who don't see the relevance for their lives, it's compulsory forced learning, like a feeding tube. You're not actually eating what you're hungry for or when you're hungry. You're eating what's being forced down your throat, and you're scored based on your ability to digest it and not vomit it, right? And my sense is that human curiosity gets stilted. Like, imagine if you were force-fed food all your life, you might not know how to have hunger. If it's on schedule and on demand, and and you might not know what you like and dislike, because you wouldn't even know what taste is, right? Because it's just been shoved down your throat. And so that's the danger. And so in my view, self-directed learning or creative schooling is about helping to evoke the natural curiosity that's innate in every human being. Babies are born knowing nothing, and they come into the world and they learn how to talk, not because someone taught them how to talk, but because they saw it and modeled it, because they want to know, they want to be like us. They learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn all kinds of skills because they're curious, right? And that's so powerful. So to me, a healthy educational system actually helps children to evoke their natural curious nature rather than robbing them of it. And I think our educational system, unfortunately, does a bit of both. And of course, there are a lot of wonderful teachers that, even against all odds, are finding ways to be creative, inventive, playful, and to meet their kids where they are. And there are a lot of school systems that are trying to create different tracks and give students options. By the time we get to college, we have a little bit more choice because we can choose what classes to take and what courses to take, but there's still a lot that's compulsory. And the whole model is based on certain type of learning that's usually based around books and lectures. What about the people who learn by experience, who learn by doing, who learn kinesthetically, who learn in other ways? And so, and not everybody needs the same information. Like, for example, when I was in school for a little bit, we were learning about math stuff that the calculator made irrelevant. Like, you really don't need to know how to do long division unless you're going to be a mathematician, because you can just punch it in and boom, you've got your answer, right? And so, but you need to know what the concepts are and what they mean, but sometimes learning the formula can actually help with that. So I think that learning how to have contextual learning and make it relevant to people is profoundly important. And so I was blessed to have parents that believed in all this stuff and were kind of trailblazers on this in our own home and helped me to follow my own path. So I started a bakery when I was 10, as you mentioned, and I learned about customer relations and bookkeeping and sales and how to wash dishes and how to make recipes and how many banana breads could fit in a red wagon and all sorts of things. I had over 200 customers around the neighborhood, and I'd sell my baked goods door to door. They were all organic, they were all vegan, and they were all delicious. And, those skills were invaluable. And, when I launched Food Revolution Network, 30 years later, I think that I had a sense of business and a sense of marketing that was born out of those one-on-one relationships at the age of 10. So you learn things every day when you're alive and awake and growing, and you never know what that might lead to in the future.
Tell us about your nonprofit, the Food Revolution Network. We had your dad, John Robbins, on the show on episode 61 for listeners who want to go back and learn more about the amazing Robbins family. But tell us about the nonprofit that you say you launched with him.
Well, so I launched a nonprofit when I was 16 called Yes, and worked with young leaders all over the globe in over 65 countries. And, one of the things I saw in that was that everybody eats, and that what we eat has this huge impact. And, I worked with young leaders like Tashka Yawanawa in the Amazon rainforest, who's chief of his tribe. And, their rainforest homeland is being destroyed, and their way of life is threatened because of cattle ranching, number one. And number two, because of soy plantations, which are being used for what? Cattle feed. And so, we helped him raise money so that his tribe could buy an airplane and a satellite phone so that they could patrol their territory to check for illegal logging operations, and a satellite phone to call it in, and solar panels too. And so that they could call it in to notify the government when encroachment was happening. Because even though the Brazilian government isn't exactly friendly to the indigenous people right now, there are laws on the books and there are people willing to enforce them. And so, that's an example, though, where we could do all we want to help Toshka fight off desperate people who are cutting down rainforests for cattle because they don't have a livelihood. Or we could cut it off at the top and say, let's stop eating those burgers that are coming from there. Let's stop supporting a livestock industry that depends on soy plantations in order to feed cattle. And let's start focusing on eating whole foods, plant-based, which can help save the rainforest, right? So I work with people like Toshka. I work with people in the Arctic, the indigenous people in the Arctic who are fighting to save their way of life. They're not vegan. They depend on the caribou for their survival. However, they're impacted by climate change, which is throwing off the caribou migration patterns, which is threatening the very viability of their people. And they're fighting to try to stop climate change. Well, guess what? Turns out that the biggest way we can help fight climate change is eating lower on the food chain. I work with a woman named Kumba in Mali, West Africa, whose people were facing famine because they have lots of land there that's not growing food. Why? Because they're importing their food, white rice, from Vietnam. Now, traditionally, they grow millet in Mali. They stopped growing millet in Mali because their government subsidized white rice from Vietnam as an outgrowth of colonization back when Mali and Vietnam were both French colonies and they wanted the colonies trading with each other. They started this practice of subsidy. Now the people are used to their white rice. And when the price of white rice goes up, they have riots because they depend on that. But nowhere, and so the government tries to free up even more scarce resources to subsidize white rice so the people don't starve. Meanwhile, their farmers are unemployed, their land is empty, and they're not growing the millet that is what their land can grow. It can't support rice. They don't have enough water. They can grow millet. They're not. And to me, this is all connected. So eventually I decided to focus on Food Revolution Network so we could support indigenous peoples and cultural preservation and the survival of the poorest and most struggling among us. And by the way, help everybody to be healthier and to be a part of the solution on planet Earth. So we launched it in 2012 and we've grown to over 700,000 members. We offer an annual summit and online courses and ebooks and, webinars and master classes and films and a website with hundreds and hundreds of blog articles and all kinds of critical food and health topics. And our goal is healthy, ethical, and sustainable food for all. We really want to put an end to a toxic food culture and help everyone to see how they can be part of the solution for themselves and also on planet Earth. We live in a time when there's so much despair and hopelessness, and so many people feel like victims of the craziness. The political climate of our times feels so divisive and so frightening. Most people feel like we're on a bad track and, they're afraid for the future. And we can't solve all of that by ourselves, but we can be a part of the solution 3 times every day when we eat lower on the food chain. I mean, it takes 20 times as much water to produce meat as it does to produce legumes and grains and soy and, and vegetables and fruits. So if you eat lower on the food chain, if you're worried about the drought, like some of us in California are, well, gosh, eating lower on the food chain turns out to be a huge step you can take. You save more water by not eating a pound of beef than not showering for 6 months. So, if you're interested in food security, you're worried about what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and the fact that, we could have 1 billion people on the edge of starvation in a matter of months because of what's going on with the cutoff of critical grain, wheat in particular, that's impacting most of all the world's poor. The rich will still be able to buy it, but we're now competing with the poor for the same foodstuffs. For the first time in my lifetime, humanity is not growing as much food as we have people on this planet. Before, we always had a shortage of justice. Now we also have a shortage of food. Climate change and desertification and droughts threaten to make that intensively worse. So those are scary things, right?
So Ocean, let me just ask you, so is the reason that we're not growing as much food, enough food to feed everybody, whereas before it was a problem of distribution, corruption, et cetera, is it because of the war in Ukraine, or is it because of droughts, or is it because there's so many people?
It's actually, I'm going to point to another thing, livestock. So all of those things compound to create stress on a system that is already inherently strained, because 80% of the world's agricultural land is used for animal agriculture to produce 16% of the world's calories. It takes about 12 pounds of grain or soy to produce 1 pound of feedlot beef in the United States today. It's a protein factory in reverse. With chicken, maybe it's 3 or 4 pounds. The feed conversion ratio is still very, very, very bad. If you're interested in helping to feed the world's hungry, the number one thing you can do is to eat less meat. It frees up land that would have been pasture that can be available now to grow food for humans, or it frees up land that would have been stuffs like soy or corn that now can be growing soy or corn for humans. And inevitably, we end up freeing up resources to help feed a hungry planet. It saves water that would have been used to produce all that livestock production that no longer needs to be. And in the process, we save water, we save calories. Now, there's no guarantee that that food will get to the world's poor. But I'll tell you one thing, if we cycle it through livestock, it absolutely won't. So it isn't just the rich that are competing with the poor for inadequate feedstuffs, it's livestock. And the livestock are mostly eaten by the rich. If you eat lower on the food chain, there's more land, there's more agricultural capacity, there's more water, and then we don't need all the food that's being captured in Ukraine or Russia in order to feed the world. We have more than enough. We could abundantly feed 10 billion people on this planet and have water to spare if we ate lower on the food chain.
You write that the food we eat kills 11 million people around the world a year and about 700,000 from the US. What is that from?
The Global Burden of Disease report from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. And that's specifically referring to what the causes of death are around the world. So starvation is certainly a cause of death in many places, but this is looking more personally at what we eat and how it affects us. So essentially, if you look at how many people die of heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and other chronic diseases that are diet and lifestyle related, and you say, okay, how many of those deaths would be averted if we ate differently?
I see.
You get some interesting numbers. And we see that the modern diet, according to these researchers, is causal in more than 11 million deaths a year worldwide. That's how many people are dying from diseases that could have been prevented with that specific change in diet and lifestyle. So we know that about 80% of heart disease, which is the number one killer on the planet, can be prevented with diet and lifestyle changes. We know that about 40 or 50% of cancers can be prevented with diet and lifestyle. 90% of Alzheimer's can be prevented with diet and lifestyle. 90% or more of type 2 diabetes can be prevented with diet and lifestyle. You put all this together and you can save a lot of lives. And I'll tell you what else you can save is a lot of money. 19% of the US GDP is going to healthcare, which is really disease symptom management. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if we were a healthier population, we could save trillions of dollars. So don't ever let anybody tell you that we can't afford to take care of our hungry people, that we can't afford to end homelessness, that we can't afford to end poverty, because we absolutely can. And people point to the military and all this that we spend on that, and we could argue all we want about that. We spend 3 times as much money on medical care as we do on the military in the United States. So if we're really looking at saving money, we got to get healthier people. And the way we get healthier people is by eating healthier food. And the way we eat healthier food is with education and also with policy changes that make it easier to do the right thing. Right now, you have to pay extra to eat healthy food. It's like you're being fined for wearing your seatbelt. Whole Foods has been called whole paycheck.
You don't even have choices in school.
Right. You don't have choices in school. And for folks who are struggling financially, they have to choose sometimes between paying rent and buying food. So of course, they're going to go with the cheapest calories that can get their bellies filled and give the energy to go on for another day, rather than the most nutrient dense. When it costs $5 a pound for broccoli at some Whole Food store, right? And you can get Doritos for way less, right? But there's something wrong with this picture, which is that we have government subsidies, tens of billions of dollars a year, that are subsidizing junk food. We're subsidizing high fructose corn syrup. We're subsidizing white bread. We're subsidizing cheap calories in factory farms, and we're not subsidizing vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole plant foods that we know would actually help people. So, I don't care if you're a free market capitalist or a government intervention loving socialist, I think we could all agree that subsidizing junk food makes like no sense, right? And yet that's what we're doing. And if we're going to subsidize anything, how about if we subsidize, getting fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains out to people who can't afford it, right? What would that do to reducing our medical bills, bringing down the cost of health insurance, helping hospitals not be filled up with uninsured people who in turn are desperate for emergency medicine. And then we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, which then the hospitals have to charge more for everything else they do, which comes back to the insurance payers. If you're worried about health insurance premiums, look at what's happening that's causing poor people who are uninsured to be desperate and ask, how can we uplift their health with things like produce prescriptions, where doctors can prescribe fruits and vegetables instead of just drugs and surgeries to help people get healthier, or the Double Up Bucks program, which takes SNAP dollars or food stamp dollars and doubles their value for fruits and vegetables. These are simple things that are relatively low cost that could help the poorest among us to be healthier and live longer, that would uplift all of us. Our society would have more money, more abundant resources, and we'd be a kinder place.
You wrote a book called The 31-Day Food Revolution, and you talked earlier about meeting people where they are, because it's hard to get, even if you do subsidize broccoli and take away dairy, yes, it will help, but
it's hard to change. So what are the 4-step process that you recommend to help people change their relationship with food?
Well, 31-Day Food Revolution has 31 chapters, and we haven't covered this in this podcast. Some folks may know, but my grandpa founded Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. And my dad, John, rather famously walked away from the ice cream fortune to follow his own rocky road and become a best-selling author writing about food and health. And my grandpa ended up having his life turned around and saved by reading my dad's book at his doctor's advice. He reversed his diabetes and his heart disease when he gave up ice cream, gave up sugar, cut way down on animal products, and ate a lot more fruits and vegetables. So we really have seen the impact food can have on our health. And so there's 31 chapters in 31-Day Food Revolution. And part of my thesis is that 31 steps to health can bring you more pleasure and more satisfaction, even than 31 flavors of ice cream in the long run. And I think my grandpa is a good example of that. The founder of Baskin Robbins gave up ice cream and lived, another couple decades of health because of it. Anyway, the book is divided into 4 parts and 31 chapters. And every chapter ends with simple action steps you can take to apply what you're learning. Part 1 focuses on detoxifying. And this is where we look at the bad stuff that could be harming us. You clear out your kitchen, you get healthy water filter, you take some of the basic steps you can take so that you're not bringing more toxins into your body, and you're clearing your plate, so to speak. And then part 2 is nourish. And that's where we look at what are the optimal foods that tens of thousands of studies published in peer-reviewed medical journals tell us we should be eating more of if we want to thrive. And then part 3 is gather. And this is where you get your social support in place. It looks at building healthy food culture and community. So many people act like healthy eating is a solo sport, but it's not. You do it in connection. You need peer groups. You need people to hold you accountable. You need family members or loved ones that will share recipes, share ideas, catch you when you fall. In a toxic food culture, you can't do it alone. I mean, maybe some people can, but almost nobody can sustain it without nodes of support and resources and allies. They don't all have to be in your immediate home. Sometimes you have to find them virtually, but you gotta find social support. So we really look at that. How do you create those mechanisms for sharing food and letting healthy eating be a doorway towards more connection, not more isolation? And then part 4 is transform. And that's where we look at being a food revolutionary. How we can change the way the world eats, how we can be a part of the solution and the movement on planet Earth. And we look at some of the gaps that people face culturally, socially, racial discrimination. Why is it that statistically the poorer you are and the darker your skin color, the more likely you are to depend for the majority of your calories on foods that are proven to cause disease? And why is it that life expectancy is lower in the Black community, in the brown community that is in the white community? And how does this all link? And what can an individual like you or me do about that? Everybody I know cares. Nobody wants racism to continue. Nobody wants haves and have-nots when some people are left out of having their basic needs met or struggling to survive or can't feed their own kids. But how do we actually be a part of changing that? And we look at the food side of that and why it matters so much to eat locally, to eat organically, to support farms and farm workers that are doing the right thing, that are treating their workers well, fair trade and what that actually means and why fair trade certification is a big deal. And also how to tell the difference between so-called greenwashing and the real thing, And we look at plant-based and why it matters when you eat lower on the food chain, not just for you, but for all life on this planet. And so you leave part 4 feeling like you get to know how to be a part of the solution, how to do good. And, most people that I know would rather not support slavery in the chocolate industry. They'd rather not support, chickens having their beaks cut off in factory farms, or, pigs having to stand in their own excrement and never being able to turn around, or calves being separated from their mamas on day 1 after birth and both crying as they're separated. Most people don't want to see that happen. But if you don't know better, you can't do better. Yeah. So we look at the impact and the implications on a global level and ultimately focus on choices that we can make. And so the goal of 31-Day Food Revolution is really to be an antidote to cynicism and apathy and despair, and an opportunity, a call to live the incredible breakthroughs that healthy food can bring in your own life and know yourself as a part of the solution in the world.
Yeah. Food Revolution was a producer on the documentary And the Need to Grow that I mentioned in the intro. Fantastic film. And we do not think about the importance of soil, but it's where all life, especially low on the food chain, comes from.
Yes.
What is happening to our soil? Why is it being so degraded?
Well, what's happening is that we're poisoning our soil and we're not replenishing it. So traditionally, thoughtful farmers would put compost on the soil, maybe manure if they have that available in appropriate quantities. And they would focus on practices for capturing rainwater rather than having it run off. But when you're just focused on next quarter's profits and you're trying to maximize production, it becomes cost effective to saturate the soil with pesticides that kill off bugs and weeds, and because that's cheaper short run, even if it kills the worms that would have been in there that would have broken down the organic matter and the microbes. Healthy soil is teeming with life, billions of microorganisms in a cup of soil. And yet when you kill all that, it might look the same, might look like, but what you've got is dirt. And dirt can still grow food, but not the same kind of food. It doesn't have the vitamins, doesn't have the minerals, doesn't have the vitality. And we get the quality of what we get is degraded, but also it tends to run off because it's dead. So when it rains, that water carries away whatever nutrients are left in that soil and the actual matter itself. So our topsoil goes down, 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 down. You need a certain amount of topsoil to grow food at all. You need more topsoil to grow healthy food. The roots run deep. When there's a lot of topsoil, they go deeper. Topsoil is a sponge. It absorbs the rainwater and captures it. So then farmers don't have to water as much with irrigation because the soil's got it. But when you have less soil and more dead soil and need more water from the outside, and when it does rain, the water tends to run off instead of going down. And so permaculture is all about creating berms and swales and bringing the soil to life so that it captures the rain and nourishes healthy plants and encourages deep roots and doesn't need as much irrigation. But on the contrary, industrialized agriculture fails on all those marks. Yeah. And then it needs more pesticides and more artificial chemical fertilizers just to keep the plants alive. And they're so sickly because they don't have the nutrients they need to thrive. And there aren't the beneficial insects and bugs around that and bacteria around that would help. So they tend to be at the mercy of whatever bugs come along that would harm them. And so then they dump poisons on those fields and it's a vicious circle. And then dead fields require more fertilizers and more poisons. And that's what we've got is this vicious circle of chemical agriculture. And unfortunately, it's threatening the ability to grow food at all for future generations as we run out of water and as we run out of topsoil because it keeps eroding. So the Mississippi River is brown And a lot of what it's brown with is a massive amount of soil from all of the agricultural land throughout the entire heartland of the United States that's washing into that river, and it's flowing out into the Gulf of Mexico. And it's our future generations' ability to grow food that is washing into the ocean, where it causes algal blooms that actually deplete marine life. And this is a terrible cycle.
Because of all the pesticides that are in it, right?
That's right. And all the organic matter that the algae will feed on, because there's way more organic matter getting into our oceans than naturally would, because it's coming off of our land. Yeah. And guess what? Some of that ends up in our atmosphere in the long run of cycle of things. We need to be sequestering carbon into the soil to pull it out of the atmosphere to help stop climate change. We're doing the opposite right now. If you look at the number of particles in the atmosphere of excess carbon that is causing climate change, we've lost more than that much carbon off of our farmland. So if we could just get back to where we were before the birth of industrial civilization with our farmland and topsoil, by sequestering carbon back into the soil, that alone would get us to carbon stability and reverse climate change. So, there's an incredible potential here. As dark as it is, the good news is, as bad as things are, that's how much better they could be. And if we can learn to grow food, not just organically, but regeneratively, so we sequester that carbon into the plants, into the roots, into the soil, and keep every new generation of farmland getting healthier and more vibrant and more alive, we're actually helping to solve the biggest crisis that the human race faces today.
And we forget about the 1930s Dust Bowl, which was part of that. That was not farming properly, right? That and maybe drought also, but not farming properly way back 100 years ago. And we had that issue, which caused huge problems in the United States. How do we solve it?
How do we solve it? So the 4 principles of the food revolution diet plan are: eat less sugar and processed junk, eat less animal products, especially from factory farms, eat more whole plant foods, and source consciously, which means organic, fair trade, non-GMO, local, supporting farmers, farm workers, supporting farm systems, supporting food companies that are doing the right thing, that have integrity and that match your values. And when you put all that together, we can really change the world. And the good news is you don't have to choose between your own health and your planet. There are some things in life where it feels like a compromise, but with food, you really can have it all. The same food choices that are good for you are also good for your world. So eating lower on the food chain in particular has profound impact on the planet. But so does fair trade and, local and all that. So the exciting thing is that every time you sit down to eat, every time you buy food, you get to make a choice. You get to vote essentially for the health you want in the world you want. And that's an incredibly empowering thing, because you get to be a part of the solution and take a stand for your life and for the vitality of life in this world. It takes some learning. Habit change isn't always easy. So have a lot of compassion for yourself. If you always grew up a certain way or liking a certain food, it isn't always easy to make big changes. So take it one step at a time and think long game. It isn't about what you do just in one day. It's what you do habit-wise over the course of a lifetime. The best time to repair a roof is when the sun is shining, not when it's pouring rain. So plan ahead, shop from a list, batch cook in big quantities on the weekend, prepare for the tough times, come up with strategies ahead of time. Don't wait till you're exhausted and stressed out and it's 11 o'clock at night and you haven't eaten all day, or you get home and the kids are screaming and there's no food on the table, because you're going to be tempted then to grab whatever will solve the problem immediately. That's when we go into finding ourselves on the wrong end of an empty bag of cookies or chips. That's when we wind up, going out for takeout or restaurants at foods that aren't really that healthy, or fast foods, or a lot of the convenience and fast foods around us are also junk food. So you've got to plan ahead and prepare for those tough times by having healthy snacks, by having lots of vegetables in the fridge, by making a big soup at the end of the week so things don't go bad, by putting stuff in the freezer. Your garden, if you have one, your freezer, if you don't, your cupboards, those are your savings accounts. Mm-hmm. If you fill them with healthy food, you have a resource you can draw on when times get tough, or just to make life a little easier during the week. So plan ahead, prepare ahead, think big, build safety nets and cooperation, share food with loved ones, build social connectivity around healthy food, cook extra. It doesn't take twice as long to make twice as much. So one of the ways you save time is by cooking in quantity. In our house, we almost always have a few basic staples in the fridge, like some legumes cooked. We cook in quantity with legumes, quinoa, amaranth, millet, buckwheat, whatever the grain is. There's always a legume and a grain in the fridge, maybe rice. And then we can combine those with different things. And we mix it with some tofu and some veggies and whatever you want. You make a stir fry, you make burritos, you make tacos, all different options coming from certain basic staples. The key thing is you don't want to be caught unawares or unprepared. And that means you've got to build healthy habits. And that takes some time. But like any skill set, it is so worth developing, and it gets easier and easier the longer you go. And the good news is that when you make these changes, you get to feel good about yourself. Not just because you're taking care of yourself, which is huge, but also because you're part of the solution on the planet.
It's such a beautiful place to end, but I've got to ask you because I think that you will have an answer that I'm going to believe. I got to ask about organic. We've had different guests on. It's like, it doesn't really matter. It's not organic anyway. And when I start really thinking about the process of the runoff, not only from animal agriculture, but from, lower on the food chain agriculture, and the crops and the soil, maybe having had glyphosate on it before or pesticides on it before, and then you're going to plant organic vegetables. And is it really organic? How are we sure? Does it truly matter? Is it going to the farmer's market, but can we trust it at Whole Foods or whatever other grocery store we're going to?
So we do have a USDA certification program for organic foods in the United States, and that is rigorously enforced.
Is it? Okay.
So if something is USDA certified organic, and technically nobody can claim that it's organic without being USDA certified in the US, then it's following certain protocols, and you can trust that. And those protocols include that it's not genetically engineered, and that it was grown without the use of synthetic pesticides or fertilizers, and certain other basic practices. Now, there are some things that are approved for organic that are controversial. For example, hydroponics are controversial to some people. For example, there are certain pesticides that are approved for use in organic, but they're generally considered a lot safer and a lot less toxic. So, there are insecticidal soaps that home gardeners will use. They're organic, but do you want to drink it? Probably not. But in a pinch, better than losing your whole harvest, it's probably okay. So there are trade-offs. And of course, there are industry forces that want to water down the meaning of organic to make it cheaper. But it does still have rigor. It still means something. It doesn't mean that it was regenerative. It does mean that it was grown without the use of pesticides and so forth.
We hope. I mean, there could be runoff in those vegetables. That's what I mean.
And you can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. There are choices to make in life, and we do the best we can, right? Of course, the ideal is you grow it organically in your own backyard with seeds you saved yourself, and it's all veganic, and you're composting your own poop and putting it out there, and that's ideal. And you're watering everything with rainwater. You gather yourself from your own land, and I mean that's ideal. But how many of us are actually going to practice all of that? I mean, we do the best we can with what we've got, and if the best you can do is go to a Safeway and buy something from the organic aisle some of the time, then bless you for that, And the thing is that organic food can cost more, sometimes twice as much.
Exactly. That's the point. So it's tough for people. It is
valuable. It is a good contribution. If you can't go organic, don't let that stop you from eating healthy food. If you're choosing between organic donut and non-organic kale, go for the kale, And if you can't afford healthy organic food, just remember that most of the studies showing benefits from eating vegetables, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them, they were done with non-organic vegetables. So, absolutely go organic if you can, but it's kind of like the icing on the healthy cake, so to speak. It's not necessary to being healthy, but it helps. And if you can't eat organic produce, then try to wash it with a tablespoon of baking soda and a gallon of water, soaking vegetables for 10 minutes, and that solution gets out about 80% of the pesticide residue. So that's a big step you can take. And if you can go organic, you don't need to do that necessarily. But if you're not able to go organic, that's a really helpful measure for self-protection. And if you don't have time for that, still eat the kale. Yes, it's got some pesticides. It's also got a heck of a lot of flavonoids and other phytonutrients that will help your body deal with pesticides and everything else that comes down the pike. So, eat the best you can, do the best you can, one step at a time. And if you can go organic, absolutely do.
Thank you so much, Ocean. Thank you for sharing your so much knowledge and from the heart with us today. Dotsie and I really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much. Wonderful questions.
Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.